Warner Mendenhall is a highly experienced, highly skilled attorney who was just about ready for retirement when this World War III scenario suddenly appeared before us in the form of the biosecurity state, vaccine mandates, etc. Warner has represented two previous guests on this program, the coerced nurse Danielle Baker and Brook Jackson, who was involved in the historic case Brook Jackson versus Pfizer. It is my honor to introduce one of the most important assets of the medical freedom movement, attorney Warner Mendenhall. How are you today, Warner? I am so thrilled that you're taking the time to join me this afternoon.
Oh, I'm happy to be here with you, Jeremiah, and with your audience.
So I want to make a couple of quick shout-outs before we get rolling here. First of all, I want to thank Gary Null for those kind words at the end of his program. I also want to thank him for his great product, which I got as a gift from my wife, Ageless Answer Miracle Cream, which Gary doesn't know that I'm going to be promoting his product here. He didn't ask me to do so. He's not paying me to do so, but I got it as a gift from my wife, and she really likes it. And that says a lot because my wife is pretty hard to please. She's pretty picky. She has very bourgeois taste, I might say. And the cream is really good. It smells great, and it feels great, and I highly recommend that. It's a very classy gift, if I do say so myself. Get that for a loved one. I'm certain they'll appreciate it. Also, I put out a new Substack article called The Untouchables. I'm not going to take time to describe the article. I just ask you to go look for my name, Jeremiah Hosea, Hosea, on Substack. And please subscribe to my Substack for free if you haven't already. If you could be a paid subscriber, that's a great way to support this program. But in the meantime, please track down that article and check it out. And please share it with some friends. Help spread the word. It has like 60 likes so far, which is nice. But considering the great people in this audience, I'd like you guys to help me spread the word and help me get these perspectives out there so we can continue to promote the conversation. And third of all, please check me out on Twitter. Look me up at Earth Driver, like you're driving a car, EARTHDRIVER, Earth Driver on Twitter. And my following is slowly building up, but it's very manual. It's like I have to do great things to get 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 followers at a time. But, little by little, it's building up, and it just helps me get the word out. Basically, I don't care about the whole popularity contest of social media, but I do care that these great conversations that happen here every week can be heard by more and more people. But that being said, we have an incredible guest, as I mentioned, Mr. Warner Mendenhall, who is a very experienced attorney. Now, first of all, let me ask you quickly, Warner, was I correct when I said you were about to retire and then you kind of got dragged back onto the battlefield? Is that a correct memory of mine?
It is. I wanted to scale back dramatically when I turned 60, and that didn't happen at all. Instead, things went the other direction. I'm probably working as hard now as I ever have.
Wow. So that's incredible in and of itself. I would love to start with an update, of course, within the legal parameters allowed to you, in terms of my previous guests, Danielle Baker and also Brook Jackson. Could you fill us in terms of the status of those two cases?
Yes. And Danny Baker's case was initially filed by another group of attorneys who at some point decided that they could not continue with the case and did something called the voluntary dismissal. So we have refiled her case and are proceeding with discovery, which means we're asking for documents from the other side. We will be hiring experts and doing expert depositions. And her case is essentially a workers' comp case, and I'm not a workers' comp attorney, but what happens when you have gone through the workers' compensation administrative process, you have an option to go to the county courts. And they have basically what's called a de novo review of everything that surrounds your case. So she's going to get a de novo or a new review without the prejudice of any other decisions, and the court will be able to take a fresh look at the evidence that we bring to the court. And, she has luckily, unlike many people, she has a doctor who has said that, her conditions are caused by the vaccines that she took. And I hate to use the word vaccines. These are not really vaccines, but for a shorthand, I may use it occasionally. But she took the shots, and if people don't know her situation, I believe her Twitter handle is coerced nurse, and it's just been a horrific health outcome for her. And she's got many, many health conditions, and her heart's not working right, her lungs aren't working right. She's has trouble standing and walking and taking care of herself and her family. It's just a nightmare for a young mother, and wife to be going through. And she's, you and I know this. There's thousands of people out there in similar condition who unfortunately the government and our communities are simply not responding to. And I did read your Substack the other day when it came out, and I think we do have this class of people like Danielle that nobody wants to address. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, the people who took the shots, even they were attempting to do their patriotic duty. They were told this was their patriotic duty. This was going to save Grandma. And, they did it. And unfortunately, they were lied to. And our country needs to, as a people, take responsibility for all the injured here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just going to add to that, I guess, before you update us about Brook's case. Danielle is a friend of mine at this point, and it saddens me so much what she has to go through. And just for everyone out there to really contemplate, aging is tough enough, just the process of getting older. A couple gray hairs start appearing, some arthritis starts setting in. I mean, we're all going to age, no matter how healthy we are. There's no such thing as an immortal person. But to be rushed towards what feels like the end of your life, to be put in a situation where you don't have the energy to live in the ordinary sense. You were taking care of your family, and now they have to take care of you because you're disabled. I mean, how horrific. And then to turn our backs on those people after they were lied to by the authorities. I mean, it's so unimaginable to me that we're allowing this to happen. It's such an indictment of our society, I feel. That's why I host this program every week. I feel that these things are just so unacceptable. I wonder, are we in a mass hypnosis? I want to wake everyone up out of this hypnosis that such a thing could even happen, that we would be so callous and so out of it, actually.
Well, I was just reading that the federal government spent $1 billion basically promoting these shots, along with suppressing voices like yours and many, many other people who were raising the alarm bell about this. So it doesn't surprise me that people, were influenced by all that money and all that propaganda that was spewed by our government. And but now we need to recover from all of this. People obviously were directly injured, but we were all injured, either because we were unable to hear voices, they blocked us from hearing, or we were unable to speak with our voice and let others know what was going on. So there's been a lot of damage to the civic body, so to speak. And that is going to be a long repair process. One of the things that it's done, as you know well, is that it's destroyed faith in our institutions. Doctors' reputations right now are in the basement compared to where they used to be. People don't trust medicine anymore,
Rightfully
and
so.
it's just a horrific place for us to be in. And science itself has not been science under the COVID policies. It's been propaganda. So we need to return to really testing hypotheses, having arguments, and having open debate about everything that's going on in our world, so that we can get some semblance of reality again.
Absolutely. Very well said. And before we get into the Brook Jackson discussion, I encourage all my listeners to go back into the archives and track down my interview with Brook. Off the top of my head, I think it's episode 17. But just scroll down there, we've been on the air for a while now, so at that point, this is one of my earlier episodes. But I find that there is a little bit of a gap in terms of there are some really passionate medical freedom activists who aren't really familiar still, unfortunately, with the case of Brook Jackson versus Pfizer. So I'm not going to take the time here to recapitulate all the incredible revelations of that case, but I'll just say it's a historic case. The implications are just monumental. And what can you tell us in terms of the update? Because there was an appeal, wasn't there?
Yeah, and for people who would like to dig in and see the whole history of the case, the website for Brook is iambrookjackson.com, and you can see all of the case documents there. The case is fascinating for many reasons. I mean, one is that it really revealed, I think, to the world through the pleadings and otherwise that this was a Department of Defense contract, that this was a military program. This really was not a public health effort. It was an effort to create what the military thought were countermeasures to a biological attack. So those are all things that I think if you say those on Twitter, or at one point if you said that it was a biological attack, you would be immediately banned from social media. But the whole purpose of the contract and the whole purpose of the military in this is to respond to a biological attack. So they have made Pfizer, through a company called ATI, a military contractor. So I think everybody needs to make sure that they've reframed this in some of those terms. And then the federal government, we were litigating this case since, people don't realize this, probably January of 2021. And the federal government came in May and said that the lawsuit itself needed to be dismissed because it was contrary to the public health policy of the United States. And that certainly begs the question because Brook Jackson alleged that there was fraud in the clinical trials. So is proving fraud in clinical trials really contrary to the public health policy of the United States? Is the public health policy of the United States to support a fraud and not investigate those allegations? So I think it's even their motion to dismiss, even getting the case dismissed, is very revealing as to what's really going on in background.
Wow, yeah, this is so concerning and alarming. It's really scary stuff in terms of not just the medical establishment being corrupt, but all the various institutions that are supposed to protect us just not functioning, it seems. So
all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. The cities got money, the educational, the universities, the high schools, the boards of education, they all got money. Money was spread around to enforce a compliance on the so-called CDC and NIH recommendations. And it really did. It helped everybody move in lockstep from all of the institutions. And, we've even seen the churches receive money. They would give churches money so they would get their parishioners to take the shot. Some churches had so-called vaccine clinics. All the hospitals, of course, got paid for administering the shots.
I just saw footage earlier of, not in this country, but in Austria, I believe. Was it in Vienna? I didn't realize they had brothels in Vienna. I thought that was a thing in Holland. But get a free room with a lady of the night after you get your vaccine. They did everything. Free weed.
Oh jeez.
Free beer. Lotto tickets. They pulled out all the stops, so to speak.
Well, we had lotto tickets here in Ohio, and there were all kinds of incentives all over the place. But that was just to bypass people's thinking.
And even recently, actually, I posted something on Twitter a couple days ago. Coupon for your groceries, $20 off of your groceries for a COVID shot. Like, wow, they're persisting with this. So this was something I saw from days ago. Go get your who knows what number booster you're up to and get money off of your groceries. I don't think those things should be subsumed And I actually think when we start breaking things down to build them back up again and start creating a saner world, I think part of that should be the separating of food and drugs under one administration. Like who said that was a good idea, actually, to have food and drugs being monitored by the same agency? I think that's wrong in principle.
Well, and the main thing again that drove this was money. Our own government holds patents on these shots, and we've seen the hundreds of millions of dollars that have flowed back to the government and to these administrators, which incentivizes them to approve them, promote them, and shill for them, basically. And that's exactly what Fauci was a pure shill for this, and he was well rewarded the way they set up the kickback payments due to the patents.
Right.
So, that's a very corrupting, very concerning influence, along with everything else. We see that pharma, largely funds, the reviews that take place.
Right.
So all of these things
and in
are
some
these
cases
feedback.
they even investigate the harm of their own product. Oh no, it's not so harmful. We checked it out.
Yeah, and that's let's go back to the initial clinical trials. The clinical trials saw we saw overall mortality in the arm, the shot arm,
right.
was higher than the mortality
right.
in the placebo arm. So the harm was right there.
Yep.
And right in the clinical trials, it was just through statistical manipulation that they said came out and concluded that it was 95% whatever effective.
Right.
But
95% of what?
Yeah, 95% of what? That's right.
And as a matter of fact, I encourage everyone, please go check out, I forget which number it is in the series, but check out my article, We Missed Our Muhammad Ali Moment. And I make a reference to a paper that came out early on that described exactly what you just mentioned, Warner, which is that we knew from the beginning they had a substantial Pfizer group, placebo group, Moderna group, placebo group, J&J group, placebo group, and in every case, the vaccinated group died more. So they knew before they released this that these are negative efficacy products if you use the proper metric, which is all-cause mortality. And as a matter of fact, if we started implementing all-cause mortality as a gold standard, a lot of products would start to reveal themselves as not very effective and not something you should take, because maybe it could reduce symptoms or provide you with, quote-unquote, a window of protection. But what good is that if it shortens your life or exposes you to another life, harming, quality of life reducing injury? But I would love to ask you, Warner, in terms of the overview, the national overview of COVID litigation, because I know when I spoke to you on a Twitter space a little while ago, you said there was quite a bit of litigation. I'm not sure if I think I remember you saying there were 20,000 cases nationally. I don't know if that's a correct memory, but
well, yeah, that is right.
Okay.
There are in excess of 20,000 cases that have been filed nationally due to COVID, all the different kinds of COVID mandates, whether it was, shutdowns, lockdowns, masking, shots, distancing, whatever, so the business shutdowns were terrible because it took, it basically took property from people. So yeah, it's in excess of 20,000. There used to be a number of very good trackers online, but it is interesting that those have been pulled down. I did look last week just to get a sense of the number of cases against the federal government in federal court. And they're not, most of them are probably not COVID related because there are also state courts out there. But there are right now today 40,000 lawsuits against the U.S. government.
Wow.
Think about what that means. The billions and billions of dollars people are spending suing the U.S. government over all kinds of things, civil rights violations, administrative overreach, firings, employment, military people suing over mandates in the military, So there is a silent war going on to use the courts to rein our government back in. And I think there's been some very helpful rulings as well on the employment side for all the people who, were fired and stood up to their employers for this ridiculous mandate. There have been at least 12 appellate decisions since May in favor of the employees. And a lot of this was triggered by a favorable decision last year called the Groff decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, which said that, employers actually have to come to court and prove that having an unvaccinated employee is a hardship, and not just a de minimis or minor hardship, but a major hardship for them. And of course they can't show it because there are no statistics that back up that an unvaccinated employee is a danger to anybody else. And we actually deposed an infectious disease doctor on this issue, and I asked him, he was an infectious disease doctor for a hospital with about 6,000 employees, and I said, do you have even one example you can show me of an unvaccinated person giving either a patient or a fellow employee COVID-19? And do you know he couldn't name one, had not one example. And in fact, we delved into his data a little more, and you probably can guess what it showed, that it was the vaccinated people who were their employees that were getting COVID at a much higher rate,
right.
and having to take days off and being hospitalized. It was not the unvaccinated.
Yeah. And this has been well corroborated by now, by the way. There was a Cleveland Clinic study. They didn't intend to find what they had found, but it showed, the more injections you receive, the more likely you are to come down with COVID. And then they double-checked, and it was reconfirmed. And then the same thing was confirmed by data from Walmart, of all places. Not Walmart, I'm sorry, Walgreens, of all places, which was administering shots. They, I guess, were taking some basic survey about people's history, which number injection is this that you've received. And again, it corresponded perfectly that the more shots you've received, the more likely it is you come down with COVID. And I've seen it, unfortunately, in my own everyday life. It's the people who have taken these shots who they still have their home tests, and periodically they're getting COVID and even running to the internet to say, oh no, look, another COVID positive test. And for some of these people, I'm thinking, wow, have you had COVID like 3 or 4 times in the past year or so? Literally going to go meet a friend at the movies. I don't ever go to the movies. Was going to finally go to, like, the first time I was going to go and see a film in a theater in a couple of years. My friend, tested positive for COVID. Couldn't meet me at the theater.
Well, and let's remember, these tests themselves are fraudulent.
Right.
If you don't have to dig very far into any of this testing and find out that it's fraudulent.
Yeah.
And all of these tests, we're looking at Lyme disease. We're looking at 23andMe. We're looking at testing companies across the board. You can send your dog's DNA in to 23andMe, and it won't recognize it's a dog.
Right.
You can send human DNA to a pet genetic testing place, and they'll tell you whether you're a boxer or a shepherd or whatever,
right.
And you've sent them human DNA. So these testing companies have really, really blown it, and I'm very worried about it because an area that I've been interested in is, what's going on with STD, or sexually transmitted disease testing. You got labs springing up so people can get a private test for an STD. They're just as unreliable. Wow. So none of this testing is at a point, that I think is reliable enough. The way they're doing it, when something, for example, you mail something through the mail, you have no idea what kind of temperature variation there is, or how it's been treated, or whatever else.
Right.
Just as one example.
Right. Yeah, such a ridiculous assumption to assume that these things are accurate, that they're being conducted properly. And of course, Kary Mullis himself said so specifically, do not use my test as a diagnostic tool. And that's exactly what we did upon his death. Within months, this man's invention was being used exactly in the way he said not to use it. But I would
Yep.
like to ask you in general, and this is, just very generically in terms of the individual person, the private citizen who is subjected to COVID restrictions and so on and so forth. A person like myself, I'll just use my own experience as an example to gauge what are our rights as individuals. For example, I'm a working musician and I was prevented from performing because of these mandates. I was literally hired for gigs, and then they said, well, do you have your vaccine card? And I said, well, no. Okay, well, you can't do the gig. So, do I have rights? Do I have recourse? Can I sue the venue? Do I sue the city? Same thing in regard to a restaurant. You told me, it seems like quite a severe violation of my rights to say I can't enter a restaurant. I can't sit down, mind my own business, eat a salad, and walk out. Do I sue the restaurant? Do I sue the city? Do I sue the CDC? Can I sue? What are the rights of the average person who is not injured severely, for example, who didn't have their life destroyed, but was injured and insulted severely?
Well, there's a moral injury that happened to everyone in this country, right? It's a moral injury to realize that government can overstep and destroy your civil rights with the stroke of a pen, so to speak, on an executive order that's illegal in the first place. And then the attorneys step up, and it takes months and sometimes years to vindicate that right. What I do want your audience to know, I'd like to talk about Freedom Council for a minute. We formed Freedom Council, that's with an SEL.org, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, to get questions like yours answered. And we are now over 250 attorneys in the group. They are spread out nationwide. We have a weekly meeting to discuss what legal issues are coming up. Through our contacts with our clients, obviously. And Freedom Council is also more than just for attorneys. We've made a very extensive effort to, locate, identify, and work with the great experts that we have out here and bring them in. We're also very interested in what you just asked me. Is we are working with groups of victims, such as the Humanity Betrayal Project, and former feds, and React19.org, Bree Dressen's group. So we're working with the groups and the people out there, to try to make sure that there are pathways that they can understand and help take advantage of. Sometimes there's even pathways they can do on their own. And so that's what Freedom Council is trying to do, beyond just attorneys, but really bring in the communities of experts and victims and the families of those that died in hospitals. And that community itself is growing, and we're learning from each other, because as I hear from you on let's say a particular case that I wasn't allowed to play in a venue, well, I'm going to look at, right off the bat, I want to know, is that venue a private venue? Is it a public venue? Is it run by a city or a county? And there are different implications for that. So obviously, we should all have access. The civil rights movement itself in the 1960s says you cannot discriminate about access. Heart of Atlanta Hotel is one of the famous cases. But the question now is, in this context, where you've taken a genetic therapy, is that a denial of access based on an illegal categorization or not in a private venue? In a public venue, it's actually usually easier because they're directly under the Constitution and the 14th Amendment. So, the public entities are, in some ways, it's easier to make the cases. Private ones, we often have a couple of extra hurdles or steps to go through. But yeah, so you come in to ask for an attorney in Freedom Council. Those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at. And importantly, and what I've seen throughout this process is that people are actually creating these groups and groupings, and they're really exploring so many ideas on their own. This crowdsourcing of information has been phenomenal, and it has shown illegal actions like, I'll give you one too, back to the vaccine injured, the failure to make a VAERS report, a vaccine adverse event report. Every hospital, just like if they had a child that came in was abused, is a mandatory reporter if there's a medical abuse or injury by the so-called vaccine. They're a mandatory reporter. Well, we have a case right now in Rochester, up in the Western District of New York, Rochester Regional Health System. Our allegation is they failed to make 12,000 reports from their system alone. So, the reason I bring up VAERS in particular is that's something that people can actually do. We at Freedom Council, we're going to be having kind of a program on that to push all the suppliers, the Walgreens, the CVS's, the Walmarts, the counties, the cities, the schools, the hospitals, everybody who gave these injections and failed to report the severe injuries that resulted is in violation of federal law, both criminal and civil law. So we want to start putting them on notice. And there is the other beauty of it is under the False Claims Act, there's actually a 6-year statute of limitations to go after them for those failures, along with a $23,000 penalty for every injury. So we're very excited about that program and that effort, and we will be coordinating that through Freedom Council. I have talked with Bree Dressen from React 19 about this possibility, and I think we might have even brought it up on that Twitter space. I'm not sure whether we did or not. But people coming together can really have an impact, and I think we're just figuring out what our strength is. Same thing is true for the hospital homicides and families who want to hold hospitals accountable for the deaths of their loved ones.
Yeah, that's a whole other massive feature of this event. And
massive.
Actually, I haven't covered that. I must confess I have not covered that sufficiently on this program. We will have guests addressing that aspect of the nightmare we were all subjected to. But how do we track down this Freedom Council? What is there a website? I'm looking for it online right now. I don't find anything. How do we support
freedomcouncil.org, and council is SEL, CONSEL. Freedom Council, COUNSEL. There you go. And frankly, we certainly like all the groups out there, and I would urge everyone to donate to the groups of their choices. Hopefully, that would include us. Certainly, the vaccine injured at React 19, and we have it right here. You can see what we did at our last conference. We do hold conferences at least once a year. Injured parties can tell their stories in there. There's a button at the bottom of that first page for injured parties. Let us know what you're doing, whether it's a hospital homicide, whether it's vaccine injury. We do want to hear from you.
Yeah, so listen up, folks. Please keep this on file. Freedom Council, FreedomCounsel.org. freedomcouncil.org. And if you have a grievance, it seems like you can contact them and make a record of your grievance. And if we all did that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And we'll try, we do discuss and we try to make sure that stories that are out there and that they are presented to the attorneys to look at and perhaps contact the injured parties. And we have a great group of attorneys there. I will say this, despite being in excess of 250 attorneys, and this is something that's probably disappointing to the audience, that's not enough. It's not even close, because in my view, we have hundreds of thousands of deaths from the hospital protocols that should never have occurred, and we probably have about at least 500,000 deaths due to the shots in the United States already. There is more to come. And we have injuries probably in the millions right now. And some of those injuries are, they can range from an autoimmune reaction to transverse myelitis, like, Danny has explained to you that she has.
Oh, so painful.
And so the range of injury is just horrific. And there are so many claims out there that need to be made. I mean, workers' compensation claims, Social Security disability claims, direct lawsuits against these companies. Now, those are going to be kind of fewer and further between because we're looking for very explicit fact patterns because we have very narrow windows to hold them liable. Right. But we do believe, unfortunately, that they have caused hundreds of thousands of wrongful deaths, for example, and we think more are coming. And, with the turbo cancers and other genetic developments that are going on, and the science around that, the testing that's being developed around that, and you've heard of Kevin McKernan's efforts, of course, that's starting to link tumors to the shots. We're beginning to understand there's DNA integration, particularly of that Simeon 40, growth promoter, cancer-promoting segment that was included in the Pfizer shots. And so the injuries are going to play out over the next decade at this point. It's going to be similar to, we all know how asbestos was such a huge issue and is still an issue decades later. Yeah. The mesothelioma there, and then the opioid crisis, how big that was, and then the tobacco litigation, simply decades of work. I mean, we're in the same kind of situation here.
Well, I wrote an article about this subject as well called Radio Silence that I'd love the audience to go back and check out if you haven't, and again, read it, share it. Because I think it raises a bunch of great points. And, if you're driving a car 100 miles per hour in one direction, are you going to slam on the brakes and say, oh, wait a second, let me go carefully examine everything that I went by as I sped down the road? It's like they steered us in this direction. They demanded that we take this stuff. They did everything, as we discussed earlier, in their power to try to convince us, shame us, coerce us. They ran the gamut. So are they going to then turn around and be objective about the harm that's been inflicted? No. They're covering their tails. They're covering their tracks. They're not going to readily admit the harm they've inflicted. They haven't shown willingness to do that. And it's not surprising, actually, because they were so one-track minded about what they were imposing on everyone. And, there's so many things that we'll never actually know. We have this kind of misunderstanding that everything can be quantified and that we have solid data pertaining to everything. That's not really true. A lot of people, I personally believe, and I think there will be more evidence to support this as time goes on, but a lot of people who have died in their 60s or their 70s or even their 80s or even their 90s could have had more to live, but their lives were shortened by these shots, and we'll never actually or exactly know that. Because once you're past a certain age, we just say, oh, you never know when you're going to go. Oh, life is mysterious. You could die at any time. But meanwhile, you may have had a person who, they died in their 60s. They were supposed to die in their 70s or their 80s. And they took this shot, and they don't get classified. They don't get recorded as vaccine deaths, but they damn sure were.
You're exactly right, and let's talk more broadly.
Well, that also applies quickly. I'll just say to anyone with a pre-existing condition as well. People who had been managing their diabetes, managing their lupus, what have you, who suddenly die from those conditions, know it was the shot that harmed you by attacking the weak link in the chain.
I have 2 points I want to make as follow-up to that. One is, with these particular shots, remember, the FDA initially was set up to regulate, the amount of a substance that went into a person and regulate based on the expected outcome. So they knew how much was going in and what roughly it would do based on that amount and based on your weight, for example. With these shots, first of all, the government doesn't even know and didn't even know what was going into your arm. They didn't know about the SV40 initially. At least that's what they tell us. Mm-hmm. So they're admitting to being ignorant of it. The second thing is, once it's in there is no consistency of outcome. You have no idea how much spike protein is going to be produced by your body once your cellular machinery is hacked. And everybody is different. So there's no controls on what's going in, and there's no control once it's in there, and there's no way to predict what it's going to do to any individual. Some people are going to be just fine. I guess thank God for that. Mm-hmm. But many individuals, as we know, millions, they're not just fine. They're damaged.
Yeah.
So that lack of predictability, that lack of consistency is exactly why the FDA was formed, 100 plus years ago, was to get to consistency, uniformity, and safety, and none of that is in play here. The second, and David Gortler, who was, chief deputy to the FDA commissioner, has spoken about this very eloquently. And in fact, he used an automobile analogy. He said, once the stuff is in your arm, it's like you're given a car, but you don't have brakes. You got a gas pedal. You don't know how far that gas pedal is going to be pressed. And you don't really have a steering wheel to direct where it goes in your body. It's going anywhere and everywhere, just creating havoc, an out-of-control vehicle, basically. So he's used that exact description. So I was smiling when you said that, going 100 miles an hour. I think that's an apt description as well. You don't pick up what's going on around you, but then it goes into your arm at 100 miles an hour, and all the controls are taken away. And and how do we ever have something like that? The second issue that I want to raise, this is not a vaccine, but vaccines themselves, cause a lot of death and injury, and there's a lot of good studies out now. Vaxxed, unvaxxed is one that Bobby Kennedy just put out, and with Dr. Brian Hooker. And I just read a study the other day that said, with sudden infant death, the vast majority of them had gotten some kind of vaccine 48 hours prior to their death for all these children. Right. So we're taking away children's lives, and we're creating very damaged parents. When you lose a child, there's nothing worse. So, the whole industry needs to be revamped, if it can be, and they need to do pure saline placebo tests if they're going to do it. But I honestly, at this point, I think the entire vaccine schedule needs to be thrown out, ripped up, and, if they want to start analyzing it from zero, ground zero, basically, to see if any of these vaccines really did what they said. I'd like that to happen now.
I totally agree, and as a matter of fact, you're leading me directly into something I wanted to ask you about, which I'm really excited to ask you about, actually, in terms of what can we do now nationally? Is it possible to start a movement, to start a legal initiative to say no more mandates in a free country, no more? You let me do motocross racing. You let me do professional wrestling where I could jump off of a cage and land on a table and hope I don't break my back. You let me fly in a plane, and a plane could crash or a train could crash. We subject ourselves to danger every day. But you mean to tell me I don't have a choice as it pertains to an invasive medical procedure because you're so scared I'm going to die of a particular disease? Where, for example, my previous guest, Dr. Ben Marble, who's worked in ER for quite some time, a couple decades now, he says in all of his vast experience, he's never seen someone die from measles or mumps or rubella.
Right.
So, I divide the discussion into two aspects, which is part number one, you shouldn't be able to tell me what to do, and you shouldn't be able to force me to have an invasive medical procedure for religious reasons, for my own superstitious reasons, or whatever the case may be, because I don't want to be told what to do. But then separately to me is the question of medical efficacy. And I think there's a lot there too. I have a lot more research to do, but I think there's a lot of evidence that we have not been shown that indicates, vaccines, quote unquote, your good old tried and true vaccines are very harmful and have actually inflicted a lot of harm. And there's actually been I heard earlier over $4 billion worth of settlements through the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which tells you it's not harmless. That's not correct. So what can we do, Warner, to start this initiative of ending all mandates, which I believe is a 19th century policy that needs to be done away with?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at it historically because people understood even back, maybe they understood better than us. Even in the even in the early cases, what you see is they didn't view vaccination as a good, which I think we've shifted in the modern era. We think of it as a good. They understood it was a harm, and what they said in the court systems back then was, well, we're going to give you this lesser harm, a little bit of exposure to smallpox or cowpox, so that you don't get full-blown smallpox later, and so that we protect our community. But they understood that they were doing harm to people, and they understood that it did hurt you, it did challenge your body, and they understood that people were going to die from, the so-called vaccination or inoculation. So I find the language around the early court cases very interesting because it was the lesser of two evils. They understood it was an evil to have the body be exposed to disease. So I really appreciate some of those early perspectives, even though some of them didn't come to the right conclusion in my book. But that thought process needs to get back in here, that this is an evil. And if we're going to look at the lesser of evils, we better have extremely good scientific evidence that it works. Yeah. And we better really understand what the potential harms could be. And those billions of dollars aren't even a drop in the bucket compared to what it's cost those families to treat their loved ones and to take care of their loved ones who were injured. I know that for a fact because I know so many of those families, and we're getting bankrupted from medical bills. From taking these shots, whether it's a traditional vaccine or especially now with the COVID vaccine. We hear from, Shelley, who's been on the Twitter space, what it's done to her financial stability. So, hey, I want to warn you. I have a 2:00 call that I must get on.
Absolutely.
So I just want to give you a little heads up before we get right up against it.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I know you have to go a little bit early, and that's quite okay. I know you're in demand by all means, but I think that we really need to start pushing this initiative to end all mandates across the board. And I think there's a growing body of evidence that additional harms are being inflicted by vaccines that we did not take into consideration before, that we were not told about. It's quite sad, in fact. I mean, there's this whole community of vaccine-injured people that are now in communication through all of these events. They meet on Twitter and they meet in various venues. And a lot of those folks are COVID vaccine, quote unquote, injured people. And a lot of them are people injured by the old school vaccines, quote unquote, the ones that were the tried and true vaccines, who now all of a sudden have a new family through all of these horrific events. But people who have been sort of living in the shadows, so to speak, with life-altering injuries from the tetanus shot, from the Gardasil shot, from all this other stuff that we were told was also safe and effective and, somehow conducive to health, and then results in the opposite. But, Warner, I don't want to hold you up. I know that you do have to get on your next call, and it has been an incredible opportunity to talk with you. And I just want to thank you and commend you for all that you do. And how can people follow you on Twitter, by the way?
I want to answer you more directly. I'm sorry. I think this effort of people to come together is really incredible, and we at Freedom Council can use everybody's help. One of the initiatives, I was out in Oklahoma last week. One of the initiatives that we're doing is working with people to develop and review sometimes the legislation that they've written up. And so, that's kind of an early program that's getting started in Freedom Council, but we want to have a legislation database, a legislative committee to discuss these proposals among lawyers and citizens and experts and legislators. So that's one effort. Another effort that we're doing in certain states, again, Oklahoma has the ability of citizens to petition for a grand jury for criminal indictments. So you can bypass prosecutors and courts and just circulate a petition under their constitution. So we would like to have, knowledge state by state as to how citizens can bring criminal charges for what happened here. Thirdly, I think one of the pathways through to getting to liability is informed consent. Nobody had informed consent on the vaccines, the hospital protocols, or anything else here. And in one of the cases that we're pursuing, the Scott Shara case, that's been a critical point because we've alleged what's called a battery. That means a touching without the informed consent, a procedure done without the informed consent, and the judge allowed us to continue to litigate on that basis despite the PrEP Act, despite the supposed immunities. There's less immunity than they think, and finally, everyone can press hard for us to lift the immunity from the backs of these manufacturers. We have to empower individuals to get attorneys to sue Pfizer, Moderna, and all the other manufacturers of vaccines, or they're not going to be careful. They have no liability, they have immunity, and then they're mandating and they're making hundreds of billions of dollars off these crappy products and dangerous products. So those are, you asked me that, and before we left, I wanted to make sure that I addressed that at least a little bit. But Freedom Council's trying to work to develop pathways to do that, and if you're out there and listening and you want to help, fill out the contact form. If you're a lawyer, an expert, average citizen, an injured party, we actually, we do want to hear from you, and we're trying to do everything we can to activate and help people understand their own power, and then to use and apply that power to help fix the system.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much, Warner Mendenhall. Again, I commend you for all that you're doing. You're doing a great job. You are truly an asset to the medical freedom movement. And, just encouragement and good vibes your way as you continue in this.
Well, thank you, and good vibes your way, and good vibes out to that audience, which, we can't do it without you, that's for sure. If I don't have a client, I don't have a case. I wouldn't be doing any of this without all the brave souls that stood up to fight. So thank you so much, Jeremiah.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be in touch, and have a great day, Warner. Have a great day and a great weekend. Talk to you soon.
All right, you too. Yeah.
Take care. So, everyone else out there, I just want to say that we have been doing this for over a year now. As you might recall, we had our 1-year anniversary episode. Episode 52 was my interview with Dr. Christina Parks. And we have several great guests lined up for weeks to come, including next week is Gary Null himself, the founder of the Progressive Radio Network. Gary is going to be my guest next week, and we have other incredible guests lined up. So please, do what you can to support this program, because the whole point of the program is to engage the public in these critical conversations. And, I'm really at the point, as I've stated a few times recently, I need to transcend the echo chamber. I'm not content just speaking with the people who already agree with me. I just spoke to a coworker yesterday, a fellow chess teacher. I don't know how we even got into the conversation, but he mentioned, they're COVID kids in terms of some of their behaviors, and he was blaming it on the COVID policies. And I said, don't even get me started with that stuff. And he said, and I said, I told him I write articles about this. I have a radio show about this. So, normally I wouldn't just go and engage a coworker about these matters. It's my place of business, so to speak. But if given the opportunity, yes, I'm going to start directing people towards this conversation more actively and figuring out new ways of doing so. So please go to my Substack, Jeremiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Hosea. Please subscribe for free. My latest article, The Untouchables, like I said, it has 60 likes. And I would love if just on account of this broadcast, a couple people just jump in there and like the article. And you know what? Share it with your friends. Share it with people who are mature enough to discuss these matters. You know, some people, they might disagree with you, but they're mature enough to hear another perspective. Some people appreciate the perspective and would love for you to send the link. So everyone have a great weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in, and keep the faith. Stay strong. Tune in next week for my conversation with Gary Null. Peace and love.